What's up guys and welcome back to Tech Plant. Today we're going to do a rooting hormone experiment. Let's check it out. Like every pothos experiment in the past, we do need to start out with a healthy pothos vine to take some cuttings from. Once you've kind of procured your vine, then we're going to actually take some cuttings from it, and you're going to have to identify where the node is on the pothos vine. Luckily it's pretty easy for this species. You're just going to look at like where the leaf is actually sprouting from the vine, and at the base where it attaches, that is going to be your node where future growth will come from. So you're just going to want to cut about 1.5 inches on either side of that area, and you should be all set. I would recommend making multiple cuttings just because you'll have multiple vines that come out of your, potted rooted cuttings in the future, and it just looks nicer. Alright, at this point I do have a pile of cuttings and I did split them because this is an experiment. So we are going to do one that is regular water and another that is using rooting hormone in water. And we're going to see how they perform and how they differ. So to kind of kick this off, we are going to dip the cuttings from one side into the rooting hormone. Now I did forget to film this, which is odd because it is the most important footage, but I did a reenactment. So you just dunk it in the jar, shake it around, and make sure you get rooting hormone like all over the node and the rest of the stick. Then I just poured some tap water in the jar. I don't know how good your guys' tap water is, but if you've had problems in the past, then maybe try some bottled water. Then for our control, we just kind of put some cuttings in the jar with just plain water and no rooting hormone, and then we're just going to kind of let these sit and see what happens. Alright, 10 days has passed since we took our initial cuttings and threw them in the jars. Let's take a look at the one with the rooting hormone first. Once I took them out of the water, you could still see that there's plenty of rooting hormone on the actual cuttings. They do kind of look gross, and the water is kind of gross and has a film on it, which kind of makes me nervous because usually a film kind of blocks out oxygen transfer and causes problems, but so far it seems pretty good. You can see a lot of root growth on these. In fact, it's actually quite fat, if that makes any sense, and you'll see what I mean when we compare it to the water ones. But there are plenty of roots starting on there, and it does seem to be working. Now let's take a look at the actual just plain water cuttings and kind of see if we can start to see a difference. Looking a little closer, you can definitely see that these are a lot cleaner. They don't have a bunch of crud on them, and that's because it's just plain water. However, I can see a major difference already between the roots on these and the ones I showed you before, which were using the rooting hormone. The roots on these ones that are just in water are much longer, almost twice as much longer, and in some cases 3 times longer. However, the ones with the rooting hormones were much thicker, and there were a lot more shorter roots everywhere on the cuttings. So we're already seeing a difference, which is really exciting. So let's wait some more time and see what happens next. Alright, another 10 days has passed, bringing us to 20 total days since cutting. Let's take a look at the ones with rooting hormone first and see how they're doing. Looking closer, they are looking pretty clean now. I think most of the rooting hormone is starting to fall off and kind of settle on the bottom, or dissolve, or just do whatever it does over time. So they are looking a little cleaner and a little less cruddier, so that's good. I can see that the root growth has really taken off. It is almost 10 times longer than we saw 10 days ago, so it really did grow quite a bit, and every cutting has multiple roots. Sometimes 4 or 5, which is pretty nuts. I mean, this stuff is definitely triggering even the main roots and auxiliary roots to start growing, where in the past experiments, we've only seen the main 2 roots coming out of the base of the node. Pay attention to this though. There isn't any new vine growth really starting on these cuttings. Let's go check out the water ones and kind of see what's different. Even from kind of the zoomed out view, I can already see a huge difference in these water cuttings versus the water and rooting hormone cuttings. There is only 1 or 2 at max roots coming out of these, and like I said earlier, they're coming straight from the node, and these are what I typically see in other experiments. However, when I look much closer at these cuttings, you can see new vine growth coming out of these on almost every single one. And we're talking almost 1/2 inch of growth, where before, when we looked at the ones with rooting hormone, there was 0 vine growth, only roots. I think at this point I'm already starting to see a trend, and the rooting hormone really puts focus on the roots for the plant's growth. However, just plain water gives you more of a balanced approach. But let's see how this happens as time goes on. Alright, an entire 50 days has passed since we initially took the cuttings. Let's take a look at the rooting hormone bucket first and see how it's doing. Looking at kind of the wide shot or general scan, you can see they are kind of getting a little old looking. I've had these in there for probably a little too long, but I really wanted to push the time and see if we could see any dramatic differences or just what would happen over time. And you can see that they do have plenty of root growth and lots of little rootlets kind of coming off of each root. Looking much closer at each cutting though, you can see that it still hasn't really started too much vine production, or it hasn't started growing the new actual plant, but the roots are pretty out of control. I mean, the roots have roots on them, and even auxiliary aerial roots have pretty darn long roots, which is awesome because it's really going to grip into your new pot nicely, and you're not going to be relying on one single root that could possibly snap. So I think the rooting hormone has done a really good job of promoting tons of root growth, and that'll give your plant a lot of stability when you plant it. Next up are the cuttings grown in only water. Let's see how they've done. Looking at kind of the wide shot, you can see that they do have very long roots, probably on par with the cuttings before. However, there just is not as many. These roots do have little rootlets coming out of them, but again, some of the auxiliary air roots have not really done anything at all, just like the two main roots that usually come from the center of the node. Looking a little closer at them though, you can see that the new vine growth or plant growth has done quite well compared to the previous rooting hormone examples, but I can tell that it's kind of tapered off. I think 50 days was a little too long to be in these jars, just because it seems like both cuttings have exhausted all nutrients from the water and just from what they had stored up. Here the cuttings are kind of side by side, and you can see kind of just the root masses compared to each other. The rooting hormone is on the right side. I'm going to pot these up and kind of keep them separate and pay attention to them. And I just want to see which one has a better advantage for now future growth, now that they have some soil and they'll be getting fertilized kind of regularly. I want to see which one kind of grows faster, or if there's any advantage like kind of post potting. Well guys, that pretty much sums up this experiment. I hope you guys liked the results. I was actually pretty surprised to see that the rooting hormone actually made a pretty big difference. There was actually a significant amount of root growth compared to the plain water one. If you guys have any other ideas for other experiments I should try, definitely leave those in the comments and I'll get right to it. As always guys, may your plants grow strong and healthy. I'll see you next time.